Hello, this is Derek Hansen for StrengthPowerSpeed.com, and this is our 18th episode of our Performance Concepts Chat. And in this episode, we're talking with Sean MacMillan. Sean is a friend of mine for probably about the last 17 years, and he's been working as a pedorthist, making orthotics, but also integrating those orthotics with shoes for clients, and doing that for over 20 years. So I know a lot of time we talk about training, but this time I wanted to get to something a little more technical, equipment oriented, and I think to some degree everybody's had an encounter with insoles or orthotics and how you choose your shoes. So I thought it was really interesting to talk about the details and the thought process around how somebody picks an orthotic, an over-the-counter orthotic, or gets prescribed the orthotic, or how it's made, and getting into all those details. Because I know at a very young age I had orthotics prescribed for me. I think I was probably about 14, 15, growing, knee pain, all sort of things related to doing a lot of sports, and went to the doctor and they said, hey, you need orthotics, we're going to measure your feet, boom, go get them done. And you thought, oh, this is going to solve my problems. Did it? I don't know. I still don't know to this day if that helped. But it was very interesting talking to Sean about, his thought process. And it's not necessarily a linear process. It's not cut and dried. It's not one size fits all, definitely, just like everything we talk about. But it's very interesting to get his opinion on what has happened through the industry, the different techniques, and what he's arrived at as a practitioner. And like everything we talk about, it really depends on the individual you're working with. So we'll get into all sorts of technical issues, and I think you'll find this is a pretty interesting discussion for anyone who cares about the shoes they wear and how they fit and how they feel. And I know myself, when I get a pair of shoes, I'm always thinking, okay, this is how it feels now. How is it going to feel in 2 months? Is this little thing that feels really good not going to feel good? Is this thing that's bothering me going to get worse? So, we spend so much time on our feet. So, think about, your experiences, how it relates to what Sean's saying. Maybe it'll change the way you think about orthotics and shoes. Maybe it won't, but definitely an interesting conversation, and like to get your feedback. So please enjoy this conversation with Sean MacMillan. Okay, Sean, thanks for coming out. I know you're down in Vancouver just for, I think you're just slumming around Vancouver right now.
I am, yes.
Okay.
Yes, for the weekend.
That's good. That's it. We've had perfect weather. Our summer has finally shown up, and it's nice to have you here. I saw you a couple of weeks ago, and I didn't have as much time to really get into the conversation I want to get into now, but this is our chance. I've known you for just under 20 years, and we were in some of the same circles when we were athletes in track and field, and we kind of reconnected 2001, and it was at a Charlie Francis seminar in Vancouver, which was a great time to get everybody together and talk about training. And so now, 17 years later, we've both gotten
that long ago?
Yeah, we've gotten a lot older.
Yes.
And I'd like to say we've gotten wiser, but I'm really not certain about that. But I want you to talk about your background. We're going to talk, we're going to get into a whole bunch of stuff regarding what you're doing now in your career, in your business as a pedorthist. But let's go back. Let's talk about when you were an athlete, because I like to think that what happened to us, in our youth has kind of formed a lot of our opinions and a lot of our ambitions right now. So let's talk about your career as an athlete when you were young. And you can start as early as like when you were in kindergarten, you were racing other kids in the park, whatever. Right. And
so it actually started when I was 3.
3, okay.
Yeah, I was 3. And I insisted on buying $6 Million Man running shoes because it would make me run faster. That is a story my mother tells all the time.
$6 Million Man.
Yeah, $6 Million Man was.
They should do a remake, but it would be, what would it be now? What would be the financial equivalent?
$1 billion. $100 billion man.
Yeah.
Yes. So, most of my sort of intro to this world was in grade 9. I had a friend who was a shot putter, and he kind of dragged me out to a track practice.
So it was a thrower got you
thrower
involved
got
in.
me involved. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I know. It's strange, eh? Actually, I hung out with throwers a lot because even though I'm a skinny man, I can eat with the throwers. So if you're still at the cafeteria food line chowing down, they liked me. So
you're metabolically gifted.
Yeah.
Okay.
Apparently, yes. Yeah. Or hungry all the time. One or the other. Yeah. So grade 9, I basically joined in Calgary. I joined CalTAF and worked with tried out a few different things, and I was a pretty good high jumper at the time and 400-meter runner, and sort of tried out both of those things. And after sort of a spring of training and working out with my junior high track club, sort of made the final in cities, and
in high jump,
actually in 400 meters.
400 meters.
So
okay.
yeah, so for some reason in grade 10 I went on to try to be a high jumper, which was disastrous because the best technique and no springs. But that was kind of my addiction into, is I made a final and never really was a guy winning races, but was always getting better and improving. That was kind of my hard worker, I guess. So,
okay.
yeah.
Good. And then you went through high school, competed. What did you do beyond high school? What was your career?
So in moved to BC in grade 12 and ran with the Royals. So ran with that group and spent sort of weekends up at SFU training there.
Okay.
And had that was the start of my injuries, and started having, I was running pretty fast but had lots of Achilles problems sort of bilaterally. So that was kind of the first trigger that changing your shoes might help, or doing some physio, or
did you have somebody that kind of suggested all those things to you, like when you were an athlete?
My coach, well, basically I had my coach. We I was going to physio and getting laser at the time, which was point and shoot sort of on my Achilles a little bit, taking time off. I was actually pool running back in grade 9, which would have been in grade 12, so 89.
Okay.
I was already spending a lot of time. I hate the water, but I spent a lot of time running in the pool as an athlete. So that was it. And then I went on to got accepted into engineering at University of Calgary, walked onto the track team that year and made the team.
Nice.
And basically my university career was filling in on relays and spending time running in the pool because I have Achilles tendon and plantar fascia injuries. So that's...
so you're like Aquaman.
Yeah. Yes. Spent quite a bit of time in the weight room and the pool.
But would you say, with those interventions, were you still managing to run relatively well, considering?
Well, yeah, I actually found that I ran... it was interesting training. I did better being on the bike, on the pool. I'd come off an injury and usually PB.
Okay.
And then I would come out and start training with the coaches again, and be within a few months I would be injured again. So it looking back on it, I should have just kept with that and stayed on the track 1 or 2 days a week and really stayed away from sort of more traditional running.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And do you think that's, we're going to get into this, but
Yeah.
did that have an impact on maybe how you address issues today in terms of, how much volume, and we can talk a bit.
Yeah, we can. But I mean, I've since had Achilles ruptures and some other things as an adult we'll get into, but essentially I run recreationally now, and I can do that off one sort of 5K run and an interval work, and I can do 10K runs and do stuff that people are running huge mileage to match. I've just figured out that on that whole bell curve of training, that it takes very little stimulus for me to get an improvement.
Okay.
And that's really changed the way I work with clients and people I work with. Is one thing does not work for one person, and you have to realize that you're dealing with people who are at either end of the spectrum or they're right in the middle. So that's really sort of affected the way I do my job.
That's great.
Yeah.
Now, you talked about going into engineering, so you're kind of like a running geek, a running nerd.
I am a running nerd.
Okay.
So I did, that's sort of a throwaway there. I did 2 years of engineering and decided that wasn't for me.
Oh, okay.
And I actually ended up having sort of a didn't know what I wanted to do, so I got an English degree. So I went from ENG is the same. That's about the only two things. And then towards the end of my degree, I figured out that I wanted to go into orthotics and other things. I was spending time in the library researching obscure Russian physiology journals and weightlifting journals and stuff in the library rather than doing what I was supposed to be working on.
Why orthotics? Like, I know maybe physical therapy or physical preparation. What
basically, one of my jobs...
and don't say foot fetish.
Definitely not a foot fetish. No, I've heard that a few times. Not a foot fetish. I actually didn't have a huge amount of money going through university, as none of us did. And so I got a job at Forzani's Tech Shop in Calgary, where I could get shoes at cost less 40. So, going through shoes every couple months, I found, and that shop actually had an orthotic clinic based out of it. So I was fitting a lot of their orthotic clients with shoes. And
interesting.
Yeah, and they were actually doing, that was a friend of mine, Eldon Davey, and what they were doing at the time is they were taking, at the time, Tiger, or it wasn't Asics Tiger, but Tiger actually made these EVA insoles that they would post, or they would tip them in order to try to affect balance and work with runners. And sort of that system was done by Jack Taunton and Doug Clement out of Alan McGavin Sports Med Clinic. So
sure.
that was being done here in Vancouver. That was sort of the clinic doing it in Calgary. So that wasn't the more sort of, I have polio, I have a big leg length. It wasn't just that rehab kind of orthotics. That was sort of running based. Sports medicine doctors were sort of influencing the West Coast here on can we affect injuries regarding with orthotics and
and performance
and performance. And so it's interesting. You definitely, there are athletes that it didn't work for at all, but then there was other people who were sort of super responders and they were competing at a higher level or getting injured less or, dealing with some of the problems. So it kind of has an engineering bent to it and how you're moving forward and a performance sort of track and field bent. So that was sort of my first exposure to that world.
And from there, where did you go in terms of your education to get to prepare you for
that? So basically that sort of mentor of mine, Eldon, was a member of the Pedorthtic Association of Canada, and what they did at the time is after you finish your degree, it was a 3-year apprenticeship. And so from there, I went through and did sort of classes in anatomy, physiology, biomechanics, and worked under a senior pedorthist to become to do the job that I do today. Now it's changed quite a bit. You have to have either a kinesiology degree or already be a chiropractor, physio, kinesiologist, and then it's a 1-year program at University of Western Ontario. And then they have various placements that they do. So my facility in Kelowna is actually one of the training facilities for students to be able to come through and apprentice is the wrong word, but basically to do placements. So,
and there's only one university right now that does specifically offer those degree programs?
In the Pedorthic, yeah. It's a post-degree diploma. So that's where it gets a bit confusing, as far as we can talk later if you want, on all the different people who provide orthotics. So
let's talk about it now, because obviously this is the Pedorthic route, but I know obviously other people like physiotherapists, a whole bunch of other people are either prescribing and or producing.
So there's kind of 3 main groups in Canada that are doing orthotics and have schooling in it. So as a pedorthist, we're a group where we assess the person, we hand manufacture the orthotic, and then we dispense it. There's kind of 2 models that are common. One is you're based in a multidisciplinary clinic with physiotherapists and other people, or the other model that's common is you'll have a shoe store associated with it and it'll be a standalone type facility. And Orthotist is another one, which George Brown College is the main area for them. They would do bracing for the whole body. So Pedorthists do lower extremity, knees down type of things. Orthotists do neck braces, back bracing, scoliosis. They do foot orthotics as well, but it's part of everything that they work with. And then the third major group is podiatrists, which is a sort of a U.S. designation. They can do minor surgeries. They do all the yucky fungus and
Ooh,
other yummy ulcers and things like that. So they actually can do minor surgery and have more of a medical base to what they're doing. When a podiatrist does orthotics, they actually have no training in the manufacture of the orthotics. They would basically cast and send to a lab. And so that's the big difference between an orthotist, pedorthist, and a podiatrist is orthotist, pedorthists have a lot more carpenter-like skills, basically.
On the engineering side. And but the podiatrist, as Seinfeld said, is not a real doctor, though, right?
No, I'm just saying you didn't really go to medical school. You went to podiatry school, which I'm sure is very grueling in its own way.
I went to podiatry school because I like feet. I chose to work with feet.
That's correct. Yeah. Everything Seinfeld says, yes.
When people see you, are they a little unaware of like all these different sources? Like what service do you provide differently?
Yeah, that's a conversation I have. The public is generally confused, and when they come in and see me, that's usually one of my first discussions is, here's the three major groups who do this, who have schooling in it and are properly trained. They are different. They have pros and cons to them. There's a lot of other providers of orthotics. So in I don't know the US, but in Canada, there's no laws saying who you see for orthotics. So they are commonly dispensed by physiotherapists, chiropractors, shoemakers. So there are clinics out there that the person has absolutely no education at all, and they're dispensing orthotics.
From an insurance point of view, what are the implications there? Like if
there are a list of people who are insured on the providers list with orthotics. However, people who are not on that list, who are unscrupulous, are willing to fill out any pieces of paper to get it covered that they want. So that's quite common for people to be.
And it will get covered in most cases, as long as it was.
About 80% of the time, if people have extended medical plan, they get, a good portion of it covered or reimbursed for orthotics. They do need a prescription from usually their physician saying that this is a reasonable treatment. And the insurance companies usually have a list of sort of symptoms or diagnoses that are reasonably treated with a foot orthosis. So if you have neck pain and you are getting a foot orthotic, generally that's not a very good reason to have it. If you had one leg longer than the other, that might cause shoulder or neck pain, or your hips are off, that would be reasonable. But essentially, if you have some silly symptom, they're not going to cover it unless it's one that's got some studies showing that it would be helpful.
So lower back pain and below is probably
lower back pain and below is reasonable. Some of the things that are common are plantar fasciitis, metatarsalgia, which is just a general description of pain on the ball of the foot, Achilles tendonitis, shin splints, patellofemoral type pain, bursitis in the hip. Those are all pretty common ones that you can have an effect with an orthotic.
Okay, let's go back a bit. Let's
sure.
talk about your early years working in the business and maybe some of the techniques, technology that you were involved with then, and what did you kind of learn from maybe your formative years in the business?
In the formative years, I think it's like any career that you'd go into, you end up having really black and white ideas on what works. And when you say situation A, here's what you do, and you only have sort of one option, very yes and no, and yes, I can fix that. Over time, of course, you find out all the gray areas and exceptions to the rules and other things. One of the big things that was really common at the time is we would basically take a bisection or draw a line on the back of the calcaneus, have the patient lying on their stomach, and look at the relationship to the hindfoot and the forefoot. And that was sort of a podiatry model that was put together late 50s, early 60s. And it was a way of sort of deciding what the angles the orthotics sat on. Yeah. They figured out probably around 2002, I think it was McPoyle who did a study on it, and it has from clinician to clinician, and even from the same person, you get different numbers every time you do it. So there's no reliability at all. It is
because even when I think in the 80s, when I was a young athlete, I went to the sports med clinic that you referred to, and they said, I think I had knee pain, like patellar tendonitis or Osgood-Schlatter's, whatever. Right. And so, you need orthotics. And then I was, like you said, you're sitting there or lying there, and the guy takes out a tape, maybe a goniometer or something like that. And then I get this prescription. I assumed it was correct. And then some guy made some orthotics out of foam and then you get them and you're like, okay, right? Yeah. But I was unaware of whether or not that was...
Yeah, so they've now shown that unless you're... I keep talking about, sort of that curve, or you're on one side or the other of it. If you have an incredibly, incredibly high rigid arch or really flexible low arch, those measurements start becoming useful. But for athletes, they're usually in that middle of that bell curve, and they have no reliability at all. Okay. So they are still taken as more of a general descriptor of the foot. But so that's an example of something that I was told, if you get these numbers, that this is the orthotic you make, much like your experience in the 80s. That's how
they
that was
were
done.
Expensive insoles, essentially.
Essentially, yeah.
And then so I remember getting those, and I may have got a couple of different iterations of the hand measured ones. And then the next step when I went back was now, okay, we're going to cast your feet. Yes. And I think there were still some weird measurements and all that, but I still really didn't understand how that was, aside from like, it fits my feet because you've casted them, but in terms of the angles and all that, I don't know how they came up with that. So can you speak to that?
Yeah, that was just a recipe that was randomly made up by someone as a general rule, and I
could just start like a class action.
I know everybody blindly follows it, and so I don't know. I worked for a company. And they were really big on technology at the time. So we had what was called an F-scan unit that we would put in shoes. And it's exactly the same system now that Dr. Scholl's used, that you stand on, and it shows you the pressures under your foot.
Sure.
That shows you the pressures on your foot, tells you nothing about alignment above or below,
and it's
tension on
standing,
fascia.
It's not running over.
We had a system where we did running. So actually it took probably about half an hour to set it up, and you had cables. Now it's a wireless system, but we had cables. You have to run on a treadmill and hold the cables up and make sure that it didn't get stuck in the belt. And But basically, the truth was it didn't radically change what we did with, the orthotic or the angles or the posting.
It was a bit of a show.
It was a bit of a show, yeah. We didn't like telling our boss that because he'd spent, I think, $30,000 or $40,000 on the system, but it was a bit of a show. So, the big thing, there's some big changes in how things are happening now, and essentially they put out some new theories on how things work and what happens. A lot of it is become now mechanoreceptors in the skin. So I'll kind of go back a bit. Ben O'Nig, who's actually was spoke at one of your events for strength and conditioning, basically proved that with an orthotic, we always thought we were helping the person by holding the skeleton and changing the bony alignment. And really, we didn't know what to do in our industry when he proved that we're not doing that, even though we still had a high percentage of our clients who were getting good results with the orthotics. So we couldn't really throw out that orthotics worked, but the entire mechanism that we explained to patients what was happening was now gone. And we had some very interesting years trying to describe to people what was going on. Now, there's a lot of it's proprioception, mechanoreceptors in the skin. They're doing some new research on, and it's showing that it's really helping. We know it helps seniors with balance. We know daily in clinic you can have put, super feet insole even under someone's foot, and suddenly they have an ability to stand on one foot better or move or squat in a different pattern without really thinking of it. And it's just changing the signal. You're big on signal and noise. Changing the signal to the brain and sort of changing, intermuscular, sort of contraction patterns and a lot of other things. So that's one thing that we're finding, and that's why you'll see 5 people with the same measurements and you'll get completely different results with them, or you go hard or soft orthotic. And it's because people's mechanoreceptors and their sort of signal or software to their brain is all going to be different.
Okay.
Another theory that's become really, really popular is a lot of people now are making orthotics for tissue-specific reasons. So there's a few prescriptions that are known with plantar fasciitis that are proven to offload the tissue.
Okay.
And so don't worry if the person pronates, supinates, genuvarum, genuvalgum, internal rotation, external. You're basically making a product that is shown to offload the tissue that's bothering you. So whether it be the tibialis posterior tendon, and that doesn't always work, but there's a number of real interesting counterintuitive things where you get someone who's really pronated and you actually pronate them a little bit more and their symptoms get better.
Wow.
So they're really going through and sort of changing the rules on what we do. Unfortunately, a lot of people, as you know, aren't keeping up with new research or new things, and they're still taking the same measurements, telling someone that you're injured because you're pronated. We've spent 30 years trying to prove that's not the case.
Wow.
I keep clicking my pens.
But that's interesting to me, because obviously that simplistic model of we're improving alignment, and then when you're aligned better, you're going to have less pain, you're going to have better force production, all this thing. It was a very simple and convincing
very, very much so.
argument, but from what you're saying, it doesn't hold true in all cases.
I think in the early days we were taught to make everything straight, and the idea was we would make everything straight, make it align perfectly and come together, and that all your pains would be gone and you would never be injured. And what we found is most people didn't really like their orthotics very much when we made everything straight and perfectly aligned, which would have been your experience.
Yeah.
And I hear that over and over, is that and that's why a good practitioner right now is willing to hear the feedback of their client or patient, and they say, look, this is killing me, it's really sore, it seems like too much. Or very occasionally you're someone like, can you give me more support? I'm not feeling anything.
Okay.
And getting the personal feedback kind of comes back to Ben O'Nigg's studies. He's found that if the patient finds the device comfortable, that they are much more likely to do well with it and get a positive therapeutic result with that.
So when you set somebody up, is that inherent in the process where you're like, okay, we're going to give these to you, we're going to have this ongoing communication over the next month or whatever?
Yeah, that typically we give someone about 2 weeks to get used to it and just gradually build it in, and that would be the same as any exercise. So we basically treat the orthotic as a new sort of training stressor.
Yep.
And we add it in and slowly and make sure that A, they're tolerating it, and B, that they're starting to improve whatever symptoms they've come in. And if they're not doing well with that, then we triggers a follow-up. Our clinic has all the manufacturing equipment there, so we actually will adjust it in real time, usually within about 10-15 minutes, and then we have the person try it on immediately and see if they notice a difference in how that's feeling or what their perception of it is. Send them out in the world for another week or so, and then hopefully we're dialing it in first time or second time. But sort of some of my best, most loyal clients are the ones that are oddball. So when I meet them, I look, if we're betting in Vegas, I'm going to say 85% of the time, the way I've done this prescription, you're going to do really well with it. If you're not, come in and I can think of 5 other ways to set up this device to do what we're trying to get it to do, but we don't know which one you are yet.
Yeah.
And it's sort of a pattern recognition thing.
It it sounds like a very similar process to when you get some sort of dental work done and they're like measuring your bite. How does that feel? And then they grind it down a little more, and then
That's a pretty good analogy. Yeah. Yes, but there's the two analogies we use. One was dental work, and the other one is with eyeglasses. Right? You don't throw out your glasses because it rubs on your nose or your ear. You go back and find out, okay, where's the problem here? It's usually pretty fixable.
Yeah, and in most cases, is it just a very small refinement, or have you had cases where you've had to like start up from scratch again, or just change something drastically?
I've completely, sort of when we get into materials, sort of the most common things that are out there right now are actually back to some of the 80s materials. We've don't use the graphites and exotics as much anymore. We found that they cracked and have some unusual properties, but polypropylene, which kinds of come out of the podiatry world back from the 60s, is really common again because it's got some flex to it.
Yeah.
And then we're also EVAs, which is more of a European technique. So EVAs, sort of same thing. There we go. Midsole your runner. So it's made exactly sort of a 55 durometer EVA is a really common orthotic material.
Okay.
And that's because it mimics exactly what your shoe is already made of. So you're not getting this foreign feel to it or unusual flex to it. I believe in kind of using materials. I don't know how many millions of shoes have been out there. They keep coming back with some of the same materials. So we try to use that. But I've had cases where I've gone for a really soft product for someone and they're not responding really well, and have to go into unusually a really rigid, hard, I've got some triathletes who are really high level who have come in and see me and says, I keep getting these soft orthotics. I know people tell me that's what you need to run, but I have these orthotics that I still have from 1986 that will last for the next million years that are really, really hard. Can you make me a pair like that? Because that's what I like.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to do that. There's differences in how that goes. So I have had, the easiest one I get is someone's been given a pretty traditional, really rigid orthotic, which does work with a lot of people, and they say, I hate these things, they're hard, they're awful. Then you get to be the genius who says, oh, I'll make you a softer product. That's
but it does come back to this whole comfort, and
comfort's really important. And it's not about, I get asked a lot, oh, are you going to look at me afterwards to see if my alignment is approved sort of on the treadmill or running? And well, no, I don't care if we made it perfectly straight. I care that we found that point that offloads the tissue enough that you can heal and respond and do your sport. I don't care that it looks perfectly straight.
Yeah.
And that's when I've started having a lot more success with my businesses, rather than arguing with someone, oh no, looks straight, it's perfectly good, you don't need that. And that brings up,
because the last thing I want to hear is you should feel better because we've aligned you, and you're like, I still feel horrible, right?
Right. So that's important. The other thing I get a lot is I get clients that have been assessed for orthotics and they've done all the measurements and they've had treadmill and 3D gait scan stuff saying that their alignment is perfect. But 2 years later, they're still struggling with the same injuries and having the same problem. Then let's offload the tissue. I don't care how you line up. We can offload that tissue and see. Tissue tolerance is kind of a big word in our industry. If your tissue is not responding and not healing, or it's not recovering, what can you do to help that? Now, obviously, kind of we talked about it earlier, kind of in our chat, that no orthotic will make up for bad training, overtraining, silly training packs. We've had an athlete in common where I was treating clinically, and you later on came in to coach them, and voila, had a proper training program. No need for orthotics, no need for some of the interventions he was unsuccessfully given from me, because it was just bad training.
Yeah, and I guess the best analogy there would be like helmet technology. Everybody's trying to say like, hey, we can make it better by making a better helmet in football, when you really have to change the sport more than the equipment, right? To affect a good change.
Yeah.
And I think we get fixated so much on the technology side that are a quick fix. And then people will think, oh, okay, this will do it. I've inserted this into my shoe. Now, let's talk a bit about the shoe itself, because regardless of what you're doing with the insole, what have you found with shoes, and any changes over the years? I know I'm trying to go back to more conventional running shoes than what's been going on in the last 10 years. And
well, footwear wise, we've gone through every 20 years we go through it. This time it was called a minimalist, but sort of a lighter weight training. When you and I ran track, we would do some of our intervals in racing flats was big, which is essentially sort of a more minimalist shoe.
Yep.
Some things that have happened there is most people at this point are students, or they work and they're sitting like we are right now. So they're tight in their hip flexors, their gastrocs are short, and then they're trying to wear a minimalist shoe. And generally really tight calves and minimalist shoe with low drops is not a good combination. And that's about 75% of the people that I'm seeing in clinic. I know there's a selection bias, but over and over and over, I'm getting them to do something to massage therapy or myofascial rolling or stretching, micro stretching, trying to work on calf flexibility. Can
you speak specifically about the drop?
So what drop is basically we're measuring the height at the heel and the height at the ball of the foot. Traditionally, what happens with shoes is about 1 to 1.2 centimeters is what shoe manufacturers figured out work due to trial error. So little changes through shoes over the years. And if you've got tight posterior chain like that, that seems to be the shoe that works really well.
Okay.
So they say about 7 to 10% of people, I've seen some different studies on that, do extraordinarily well with zero drop, sort of 5-finger toe Vibram shoes.
What percentage was that?
Well, 5 to 7%.
5 to 7, okay.
A few years ago, that was 57% of the shoe market. Which is too much, right? There's people who are not doing well with it. So really, we've gone back to the traditional 1 centimeter drop stuff. This is an ASIC shoe called the GT 2000. That's been around in various forms since about 86.
Okay.
And they keep updating it, and it keeps coming back. The newest stuff that's coming out is Hoka is making a lot of stuff which are low drops. So they're about 4 millimeters from heel to ball. But they've got really huge light platforms. So they're kind of clown shoes, stilt shoes, supposed to give lots of cushioning light. Because though they have a really big rocker on the forefoot for that platform, they are still getting sagittal plane movement. So some people actually do really well with that, even though they're tight in the calves, they can get away with that. Things have really gone through. For a while in studies, it was telling us this shoe has like a firmer density in the midsole, which theoretically keeps the shoe from, I wouldn't say, it has some stiffness medially to keep you from pronating as much. For a while, they were saying that didn't work. There was a study with Nike that a pedorthist that I here in Vancouver did, Michael Ryan, and it showed that flat pronated feet did better in a neutral shoe, and neutral people did better in a stability shoe. And it kind of threw everybody, kind of freaked out and went, oh, I don't know what that is. But again, studies, there's always conflicting studies. There's a couple new ones saying that generally people if they're not using an orthotic, do better with this dual max or medial post and actually feel a lot better with it. So really hard clinically to follow the research because it's a little bit all over the map.
And like you said, if it comes back to comfort, it may be highly individual.
Yes.
And it's not something that's statistically going to be proven that it does this for everybody. It's going to be your preference.
Yeah, I mean, kind of in our study when I've seen him speak another time, but I'm thinking back to your event that you did where Benno spoke, is he showed that orthotics basically generally had no effect on a lot of people.
Yeah, people would pronate through the orthotics.
Yeah, basically that it wasn't doing what we said it was with forces and other things. But then in future things I saw with him, he said, well, the average person, when we average everybody out, we're not having an effect. But if you pick out individual members within their graphs, they'll find super responders where it's life altering for them to have an orthotic. And you've got other people where it's very detrimental and it's causing problems. So that's the individuality of things that definitely occurs.
And that might not be structural, that might be neurological, would you say? Like that?
Absolutely, yeah. There's much more going on than we thought. As far as orthotics, and the individuality comes in that everybody responds differently. So if you do see 5 different people to get an opinion on orthotics, you're going to get 5 different opinions on what happens to the orthotic. And I don't think that's necessarily bad. I think it's not, if you're working with a strength coach, or you're working with in the speed world, I think you are going to get some different programs and different philosophies that are successful for a lot of people. So my industry is no different that way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you almost have to find the audience for what you're providing, I guess, unless if we go back to speed training, a lot of the questions that I get will always be my response will be, well, it depends, and I'm sure that's the same for you.
Yes, I'm getting more wishy-washy sounding as the years go by. Yes, that's exactly it. Another thing I get a question all the time is I get asked about over-the-counter insoles.
Yes.
So actually, you hit me an email.
I did.
I got answered by about 5 people before I got to you. I wasn't quick on social media there, but Superfeet is a common brand. Sole. There's a new one in town called Need, which is similar. And they actually are proven to work as well as custom orthotics with a lot of people. The key that I always tell people is these are made for kind of a standard average muted out foot shape. So much like ASICS has worked out a pattern of shoe and a pattern of things that works for a high percentage of people, that's what they've done here at Superfeet. And they've done a great job. But if your right and left foot are radically different sizes, you have an incredibly low arch or a really high arch or asymmetry, I'm really since my Achilles rupture, I really bow a lot more on my right leg than my left. So my prescription's way different on one side than the other. So over-the-counter stuff does not work very well for me. And that's usually with a client what I'm looking for. If someone comes in and their feet are pretty symmetrical, they've got, say they have arch pain and their feet are symmetrical in how they're moving, I think sort of that $50 to $60 product is the way to go.
So you will push them and say, like, hey, try this first?
I think you should try this first, follow up with me in 2 weeks, and I think that's the appropriate thing to do. I know in Germany, they actually, I've been told anyways by the manufacturers, that their insurance companies have a rule that you have to have trialed 2 over-the-counter products before they will, and then have, I can't remember their designation there. I'll find out in October.
So try Tylenol before we give you Oxy?
Exactly, that's exactly. And I think that's a pretty reasonable way to do it. A lot of the times you can control things pretty easily. I get asked a ton about Dr. Scholl's and their system. I'm going to address it because it's my most commonly asked question. And basically, that's F-scan technology. It's probably about a $10,000 or $12,000 pressure imaging system. It is world class. They use that same fine film in the automotive industry. I think I've heard NASA uses it to find out the tolerance between materials and what the pressure and friction is with it. Okay. So that's world class. There is a class action suit against them regarding them claiming that they're orthotics, because really there's very little clinical mechanical difference between their A136 and their B452 or whatever their numbers are. They're same $30 over-the-counter softer insoles. We do find that things that are incredibly soft usually are helpful for a couple weeks, and then they start to pack out and mold out. And so if you go too soft, it's kind of like you get really fatigued if you walk in sand all day. Feels really good at first, and then you get really achy and sore because it's so soft. Or in speed training, if you change from grass to the track, the body has some time to adjust to that. There's some stiffness issues with tissue that comes around.
And honestly, I found that you probably keep this in mind when you're prescribing stuff for people, but I've bought shoes that it felt really good in the showroom, and you're like, oh, these feel really comfortable, but like you said, 3 weeks later, I'm like, wow, these don't feel good at all. They feel too soft.
Yes, and that's a big thing is, I don't know, to be fair, shoe companies are there to sell shoes, and if it feels really memory foamy and really soft when you're buying it, then you're going to buy it, and away you go. That you're also going to replace them a lot quicker, because they're going to feel dead, and
that's true.
Kind of becomes the crack cocaine shoes, right?
Yeah.
They're like, oh, these are awesome. Oh no, they're not feeling very good. Oh, I'll get a new pair. Oh, these feel awesome.
Yeah.
And on and on and on.
Plan to obsolescence.
Yes.
Now, can we go back to, I mean, we talked a bit about the
rise and drop. The other big thing that's happening with shoes, and this is game changing, is pretty much all the brands are doing this, but if you look at this shoe, you'll see that there's almost no stitching in it. So they've done a reinforcement around the toe. The rest is all a heat vulcanized system over, so there's no stitches anywhere in the front of the foot. Now that makes a huge difference in comfort and fit, and we know that that's one of the main features.
And weight too, because they feel lighter than...
They're much lighter when we do that. They also... So they're either doing a knitted weave mixed in with like a vulcanized like overlay. Brooks is doing some pretty cool 3D printing over fabric in order to have some structures to the shoe so you don't fall off of it. But it's there's no pressure points, and it's important you don't have big pressure points and things gouging out of your feet. There is a performance advantage. They're way lighter, and if your right and left foot are different, that's a huge thing. They sort of swallow up your foot a little bit better, and they...
How are they in terms of durability?
Durability is getting lower and lower. I remember, one of the ways I paid my way through school was at, that Forzani's tech shop, high-end shoe store, and I remember saying, I know they used to say 2 years your runners would last, but if you're a marathon runner, they're only going to last a year. And people were freaking out that, that's ridiculous. Well, now most of the manufacturers are saying an athletic shoe is going to last you 3 months. And the functional life is gone, the EVA is packed out and molded down, and you're not getting the same function out of that. So... and that's something that I'll often, I've got to start doing this myself, but I'll actually get people with get the Jiffy marker and write an expiry date inside their shoe, because you think you've only had them for 3 or 4 months, and often you look at it and it's 10-11 months and things are sore, and it's your shoe that's the problem, not something else. So planned obsolescence is definitely there for footwear. Yeah.
It was interesting. I actually, before yesterday, I was just, something came up on YouTube, and it was an old comedian talking about, I went to get shoes, and they said I had to buy these shoes. They're $180.
Trying to get in shape myself, I signed up for a half marathon. I had to get the shoes. These places are high tech now. They put you on a treadmill, they put a camera on you, they feed data into a computer, then they recommend a shoe based on how you run. I found out I run very expensively. They want me to pay $180 for a pair of running shoes. I thought that was pretty steep. The guy goes, well, all the marathoners use them. I said, well, give me some for $90. I'm just doing half.
So as far as, that's actually a good thing, is for a while they were saying that buy the cheapest shoes you can possibly buy. I don't think that is a good idea. The materials aren't as breathable. They're not using some of the newer technologies as far as reducing the stitching and stuff. I also don't think you need to buy the $220 top of the line shoe. I would say sort of mid-range for an athlete shoes usually going to be about $150, $160. That's Canadian. In the States, they're probably like $120. It would be my guess is what the cost would be for that type of shoe. Again, it's going to be comfort. You're the higher end the shoe, the more you're getting to be the guinea pig for the manufacturer to find out if that new technology works in a shoe. Whereas the things that work tend to filter down over 2 or 3 years into the mid-range shoes and eventually lower than that.
Now, if we go back to the orthotics, and one thing I want you to speak to is emerging technologies or new innovations that are happening in the business, and that if you're talking to somebody who's going out and looking to get orthotics, what should they be aware of? Like, should they be going after the latest thing, and whether it's 3D printing or something that looks really sexy, or what kind of information?
Sexy orthotics, I don't know, man. I don't know. But well, there's sort of the traditional way. I should have brought some props here, but the traditional way that they've kind of been made is a plaster cast or fiberglass at the cast of the foot, or the European way, which is you're taking a foam box and getting a mold of the foot. American podiatrists will say that foam box don't work. Europeans who use a foam box say that the plaster cast is crazy. They'll fight it out forever. They both work. It's kind of a different recipe to make them. There's a different procedure. So that's kind of the gold standard, is that we're actually taking a mold of the foot, pouring out plaster and making it from that. About 20 years ago, I was at a conference in Chicago. They came out with a system called SharpShape, and basically we were scanning molds of feet, which worked not too bad. And now they're moving into scanning the foot directly.
Okay.
And what happens is when you take a plaster cast of the foot, or when you're pushing it down into a foam, it distorts the foot in a fairly predictable pattern.
Sure.
And that's part of 30, 40 years of us deciding how to manufacture the orthotic in the process. When you just scan a foot, whether it's your cell phone or iPad's the new way to do it, that doesn't tell you the soft tissue expansion. It doesn't tell you anything about the mobility of the foot, or
So it's not loaded, right?
So it's not loaded in any way, shape, or form. Now, with plaster casts, usually they're not loaded, but there's some guidelines on the clinician has checked out a few things and decided how the foot's going to load, and they've watched them walk and stand, so they have some idea of how that is.
Okay.
When you just take a scan of your foot, you don't get any of that. As far as some newer technologies, about 20 years ago, they started milling orthotics directly out of plastic. So they scan it into basically kind of an architectural program, and you go through, you design the orthotic around it,
Yep.
and then out of a big block of plastic, you mill out a plastic shell for the orthotic. So that traditional thing. The biggest problem with that is actually environmental. So you've got all these shavings of plastic, which becomes waste. It's the same milling system that you'd use to do motorcycle wheels or other things. And when it's steel, you just take your big bucket at the end and you recycle it and get money for it. When you do that with plastic, there's really nothing you can do.
It ends up in the ocean and kills
It ends up in the
whales.
ocean and kills whales. And so I don't use that mostly for that reason. It's just the waste stream is way bigger than the
That's fair enough.
handmade way to do it. The other thing that's happening is 3D printing is becoming pretty popular.
Yeah.
I'm not adverse to that at all. In fact, at UBCO, their engineering group and their startup group, we kind of looked at some 3D printing options and how that works. The problem isn't with the 3D printing, although some of it's how the materials function. It's the software that works around it. So if you've got a foot that has really weird, unusual, or little bumps and things in it, the software just takes points and takes a line of best fit.
So smooths it out.
Smooths everything out. And generally you're not getting that intimate fit that you need to move forward.
Okay.
They're trying cool things. I saw one today. Someone presented in, I can't remember where it was in Europe, that they've designed a 3D printed one that has 3 springs underneath the arch built into the 3D printer. Now, if that was a great idea, we would have had springs under the arch of our handmade orthotics. There's really no difference there. So that, I think, will work really well at some point, but really buyer beware. Most of the 3D printed orthotics on the market are exactly the same that you can do much cheaper with traditional means.
Okay.
So you end up getting something that's same as a $50 or $60 super feet, even though you've spent $500 or $600 on it.
Yeah.
So I've taken, and I'm partially stealing this from one of your things you've put on your website at one point. With orthotics, I'm entirely doing the George Costanza model of orthotic design. Everybody right now is trying to 3D print. Everybody's got scanners that attach to their iPad that they're trying to scan the foot and save time. The idea is you're trying to get the orthotic. If you don't make your own orthotic, the advantage to scanning is you get it to the lab just with an email, rather than having to manually mail casts out to the lab. So that's why they're trying to do it. And so I've gone very boutique-y. I'm hand making everything. Yep. Every client that I see,
you have a relationship.
I have a relationship. Very often in the process, I grind all the shells for my clients. I'll look at it and go, oh, that, by the time you took this negative impression and poured out a positive impression and then we pressed it out, it doesn't look the way I thought. That's not going to work. Let me make this change. And so you can make a change right in the middle of the process, rather than it goes through a computer system. The big problem is the software with 3D printing and milling. So lazy technicians who have to scan in files, and what you would do manually with plaster, you have to do on a computer system.
Yep.
And all the computer system have an easy button, scan the right foot, easy button, left foot.
Yeah.
And so they'll do a mirror image, and
Because you're just trying to streamline a process.
they're trying to streamline a process, and the person working in the big factory of orthotics may really care about what they're doing, or they may have been having a day and they're just trying to slog through the big backlog they have.
Yeah.
And that's where the problems lie with orthotics a lot of the time.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's always probably going to be part of the industry, right? There's going to be like, hey, scan your foot with your phone, and then we'll get some guy in China to make it and then ship it to you.
Yep. Very, very easily done. And depending on who's in the factory in China, that could be done incredibly well, or it could be
A disaster.
a sham.
Yeah.
Because the hard part is things a millimeter here and a millimeter there and a 2 degree angle there, which is kind of a 2 degree different, that little twist can be incredibly comfortable or incredibly painful. It's really a princess and the pea kind of industry.
Yeah, rocking the shoe. Yeah.
Yeah, rocking the shoe. You can, you've got the wrong socks on, things really bug you or hurt, and that's...
Well, that's true. Like even like I'll put on a pair of socks, and if they're not aligned, like the seam might be in a different position, and you're walking, you're like, wow, this feels horrible. And then it kind of downward spirals where you're like, now this feels really horrible, right?
Yeah, and it's because when you have that small irritant, your brain recognizes that, and it changes the whole firing pattern of your body. You're going to set your foot down differently. You might swing your arm a bit differently around it. If you're on uneven, this is sprinting, but if you're running on uneven terrain, people's shoulders go up and they twist their arms differently, and it's, a small change in the terrain, right?
That's interesting you say that, and we'll talk about that a bit. Is obviously anything that happens down into the ground, and because that's your interface with the ground is your feet, you can see things magnify up top, right?
Absolutely.
Have you noticed that? Like somebody's like shoulder will rise or their arm will swing out, and if you can trace it back to the shoe, that's pretty interesting, or the foot, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
And so when you work with somebody, you're doing the shoe, the insole. What do you do outside of that in terms of addressing their training and addressing other physical therapy issues?
So usually what I do is I do just a general postural screen, a general John video. Hi, I've got terrible posture. Leaned right over. That's gravity. No, postural screen, general hip mobility, arm shoulder mobility stuff. And just so that when I see them move, I generally do a video of them walking or running just to see where things aren't moving the way they should. I'm not telling them I'm going to fix those things. I'm just identifying what would affect the way they move. Yeah. I'm a big believer that you address the reason behind the so-called bad movement pattern and address those rather than change it. I'm also pretty careful that there's been some really, really kind of cool work coming out of, with Brooks actually, with their team about just preferred movement patterns. So you may have people who naturally move through a certain movement pattern and it's not correct, but for them that's the most efficient way of them moving and you shouldn't mess with it. So I have to be careful. I also don't want to be the person who in an hour and a half spending with them tells them that everything they're doing wrong and they have to change all their training. And it's much like sort of when I coached the Kelowna Running Club and worked with their sprint group, you're at Western Canada Games and you've got an athlete, or Canada Games, you got an athlete that you're in charge of. You don't tell them that their start is wrong or they should change the foot that they're working with or their arm swing's wrong. You have to keep your mouth shut, keep your mouth shut, keep your mouth shut because you can't be the person who doesn't know them very well. There could be a very good reason that that's not working properly for them. So that is my fear with, when I do an assessment with a client, I say, look, I can see these things. I'd caution, we can talk to your coach, we can talk to your physiotherapist or massage therapist, or chiropractor, to see if we need to deal with this or not. But I'm not identifying it as a problem yet. It's just something that may need attention.
And you've opened up those lines of communication with other practitioners?
Yeah. Generally, it's quite good. As long as you do it in a respectful manner, it's when you actually start saying that something's wrong or things aren't working right, and they've been working on another treatment route that it becomes a problem, and you step on their toes. If you send off a nice little email and say, "Thanks for sending Mrs. Smith. As part of our, we're going to treat her as you said, but we notice A, B, and C going, they've got a positive trend. They seem to have weak hip, or they're asymmetrical through here. Can you reassess it and, work together, see if it needs to be addressed or not?" Yeah. So it's more of that, recognizing it, pointing it out, and then leaving it for that person to deal with is being respectful. It's super important.
You're just laying out the facts and the information that you see, and then ultimately they have to make a decision on that.
Yeah, the biggest thing that I see when I'm assessing a patient that's really interesting is it's kind of cool because it comes back to, there's a lot of things I was taught about biomechanics of running that when Charlie spoke, and actually you did infographics on biomechanics of running and proper running technique, you probably won't remember, it was almost 20 years ago, but I kept saying, "Are you saying this?" He'd go, "Yes." I'm like, "Okay." And he goes, "Do you have a question about that?" I'm like, "No, I just want to confirm." And a couple of them was proper arm swing. Proper arm swing is something that I go over with most of the runners that I work with.
Yeah. That's where I usually start.
That's where I start. And I think because I come from a coaching background as well as you. The other one is people are really confused on the importance of vertical displacement, and that vertical displacement is bad. There's a lot of biomechanics literature where people make the assumption that having a vertical component to their running is negative. Later I can go over, there's some people who, if you do want info on running biomechanics, there are research who are doing a really good job, and there's some that are off, as far as I'm concerned, way off base, which we won't talk about those ones, but we'll point people in the directions, the ones that are. Yeah,
well, I did a podcast, I don't know if you heard the one with Ken Clark, and he was talking about the research that he's going over, and it's on treadmills, but he's finding that the vertical forces are Peter Wand and Ken Clark, right?
Yes, yeah.
And it's pretty indisputable in my opinion.
Yes.
Everything that we're doing is to oppose gravity or to manage gravity.
Yes.
And the vertical component is huge, and I'm sure you see that reflected even in the footwear. It's about how you put force into the ground and how you get a return.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So now if we talk about the future and what you see, obviously you have a model that works very well in terms of the relationship you have with your clients, the handiwork that you do. It's very custom, individualization oriented.
Yeah.
Where do you see things moving forward if you're going to innovate in an area?
I think all the research points is that we have to continue to be individualized for the person. So even if we take advantage of 3D printing or other technology, we're going to be able to 3D print shoes that are, direct to what we're doing. We're still going to have the issue that everybody's going to respond differently. Just like with medicines, some people are intolerant of certain medicines. Some die from pharmaceuticals. Some people are super responders and have no side effects. I think in the footwear and orthotic industry, doesn't matter what technology we're using to capture the foot or move forward, we still have to have basic biomechanics in place, and we have to have a process of individualizing things. So I'm delighted that we still have shoes that are really minimal, and we have shoes that have great big platforms on them. And there's a whole array.
Yeah.
And I think with orthotics, I think we need to have, need to have polypropylenes. We need to have the softer foams and things, because people will respond to each of them. So, we can move forward and do what we want there. There's going to be individual reactions to that. So
and there's nothing wrong with being wishy-washy in that sense, in terms of saying, like, we have all of these options, let's see what works for you.
Yeah.
And it might not be the first choice that
right.
succeeds for you, but
yeah, I think a lot of it becomes about pattern recognition. And I think that's really where our industry comes from. People don't realize that, but shoemakers back in, the 1600s noticed that people's feet hurt, so they threw a little bit of felt up underneath this spot and experimented with it till it felt good. And then we found, this hurts, so we added this to the heel of the shoe or changed the pitch of it. And a lot of what we're doing, and we're, much like researchers are confirming things we know about coaching and HIIT training and interval training and other things. In the orthotic industry, there's things that I'm doing. I am a custom shoemaker. I'm not doing that actively at this moment. But when you look at books out of London from 1865 and 17 something, they're doing all the same things that we're doing with orthotics right now. It's but we now have these scientific explanations for why they work or they don't work.
Yeah.
And so, I think we're just going to keep faster and easier ways to do it. I do think as far as gait analysis, the way we're going is it does take 10, 15 years to be really good at noticing things.
Sure.
And I think the big advantage to some of the software, if they do it right, is that the software or the video capture imaging will be able to pick up which pattern that you fit into.
Okay.
And then move forward. I know that's something that at University of Calgary, what's this? I shouldn't blank out on his name. Dr. Reed's going through a lot of stuff where he's putting you into little baskets on where you fit as far as your movement patterns, and then treatments are based on that. So, doing some heavy mathematics to figure out. Incidentally, I did some stuff on his system when I was in London, and I'm in the bottom 9% of recreational runners as far as biomechanics go.
Okay.
Walking, and then when I run, I think it's due to my track background, I think I'm around the 30th percentile. So
Okay.
basically, it's a predictor of injury. 100 would be your bulletproof.
Yeah.
And that's not a big surprise to me. I can only run so much with that. It matches my pattern as an athlete.
But
So-
even saying that, when you're assessing somebody and understanding what their primary source of locomotion or exercise is, if you have a runner versus somebody who predominantly walks, that's going to change your
Totally. Yeah.
approach as well, I assume.
Yeah, absolutely. So I always assess a person walking and if they're a runner running. We get lots of people who are. My wife's Lisa's a great example. She's quite an excessive overpronator walking, and she is a rigid, hardcore supinator when she runs and can't run any other way. And so it's interesting, making an assumption, the old style of making an assumption, back to that taking measurements on a bench has no relationship to how do you walk, how do you run.
Sure.
If you're running, are you jogging?
At different velocities, it changes too.
Well, and that's been one of my big successes is I've had a number of soccer players, football players, and other where they're actually not wearing. I can think of a sprinter that I worked with about 10 years ago. I made him orthotics for his day-to-day shoes and for warming up and cooling down. I didn't do anything in his spikes because mechanically looking at him running in his spikes, super sound, great athlete. But when I watched him jogging, there was all these things going on and things that I could offload. He was, having really bad shin pain, and it's really easy to offload that and make that work better.
That's good to hear, because I know when I was getting orthotics, they're like, you got to put them in every shoe you wear, and it just felt awkward in certain shoes, right? So that's good that you recognize that and you're giving people guidelines for use.
Yeah, it varies. I mean, I work with, and it's just there aren't as many speed athletes in the general public, so I'm also working with a lot of ultra runners, huge number. I'm in the Okanagan, so lots of triathletes, and I'm working with quite a few professional cyclists right now. And
do you have any CrossFitters that come in and say, like, I do CrossFit?
CrossFit aren't big orthotic providers. I've had some CrossFitters, and I've also actually had some people who are doing like fitness shows and stuff that are having trouble squatting and getting back pain and other stuff. And
weightlifting shoes.
And then getting them in a weightlifting shoe instead of their zero drop CrossFit shoe. Although I will say that industry has moved into a more appropriate shoe for doing Olympic lifting, so there's some better options. But I've had a couple where putting an orthotic in there has they don't have a technique problem and a coaching problem. They have a mechanical problem that we can get in, and they're like, oh, I can squat without pain. I can do a snatch without having discomfort there now.
Yeah.
Now, when we're working with someone who's a lifter, and of course you've worked with a lot higher end lifters than I have, but we have to go with more rigid materials. So if someone's predominantly lifting in it, we're locking them up pretty aggressively with the orthotic, and they love that. So much like a lifting shoe is higher heel really stiffens. We need to do the same thing. Otherwise, they don't have a stable. When you have a lot of weight under you, need a very stable platform underneath you.
Yeah, you don't want to be standing on Bosu balls. Now, can you speak a bit about your business? And it's located in Kelowna.
Yeah.
And what's the website there?
So our website is orthoquestpedorthics.com. If you Google Orthoquest, it would be me or a tooth company in Texas. So pretty easy to figure out who we are. There's only 2 Orthoquests.
Goes back to the dental analogy.
So yeah, the dental analogy. So if it's in Texas, it's not me. Basically, what we do in our store is we've got 2 parts of it. Orthoquest, we manufacture orthotics. We actually do manufacturing for other pedorthists across the country as well. Nice. We have an assessment room where we see people, and then we've actually put together a shoe store as well, because we're providing, $400 or $500 products, and they only work when they fit in something. So we've sourced out a lot of footwear that come in widths or difficult to fit people. A whole big series of stuff. This as well as bracing. The other part of our business, my wife heads up, which is called Kelowna Kinesiology. Yep. And we do a lot of injury rehab work. We also do a lot of prehab stuff with runners and other athletes, where we're doing some functional movement screens. We're looking at how they move and function. You worked with my staff. Was it last year that we came out to work with you?
It was a year ago.
So we're doing a lot of EMS work with stuff with some really incredible, really cool results. So people who have kind of tried everything, and we're getting sort of basically signal noise changes in how people are functioning, which has been great. Do a lot of fascial work with people. So that's a really nice sort of part of the business we have. The other thing which I'm not an expert, that's sort of their thing, but we have a K laser, which we've had some really exceptional results with as far as healing injuries and things that are stubborn. Works really great on acute injuries. So if you've done a workout and you're like, I'm a little worried about my hamstring, it's really sore here, we can sort of promote the natural healing process with that. Really good with our typicals, which are Achilles tendonitis, plantar fasciitis, patella tendon pain, that type of thing. We use that for most of our clients with some pretty exceptional results, actually. It's
nice to have this the orthotic shoe side, but then you can internally refer.
Yeah, so I'll get someone and say, yeah, you're getting back pain, but you've got a lot of restriction, you have no internal rotation on your right hip. Let's set up an appointment and have that assessed and looked at, and so that they'd be given some hands-on mobility stuff and exercises and things to move forward, just to deal with. I can deal with part of the problem from the ground up. There's plenty of things that happen from hips down or spine down or whatever, and you have to recognize that I can help part of the problem. I also aggravate problems if I sort of misread things, but it's a really good combination to have 2 of them in the same spot. So.
Yeah, and do you have a lot of people come from out of town, like that just have heard about you?
Yeah, we from surrounding areas we get quite a lot. The big thing we get is we'll get people from Calgary, Vancouver. We've had people from out of country. It's like, my sister has the same problem as me when I'm coming into town.
Nice.
I'm going to do that. I have had quite a number of university athletes who are, of course, away during the year, but they're back over Christmas, over summer. I have assessed people late on Christmas Eve because they just got off a plane, and done some fast turnarounds in order to work with some athletes that are having problems. Big thing with my athletes that are working away is giving them really good education on what's going on, so that I've got a pro cyclist that I'm working with. It's like, who's a kinesiologist, so he's great, but it's like, here's what's going on with you. if someone tells you something radically, they may have a different treatment option, but if they're telling you something radically different than what I've told you, you need to talk to your, team and your management team and say, hey, this is not, Sean's dialed in what's worked. Let's not go too far away from that, or, give me a call. So I do have some athletes that I've worked with that way. I wish with my speed athletes and my runners that I had some good, anecdotally, we're getting sort of higher power outputs. We're having better contact times, but we don't have any research showing that. The cool thing is with my cyclists, where they all have power meters on their bike, right, and they're looking.
That's right.
So you have to have a high. I've got a sort of mountain bike style triathlete, so we can't do a lot of measurement with her. But with my road cyclist and my enduro kind of professional cyclist, she's getting 3 to 5% increase of power at threshold. Nice. Which is huge. And he, to be fair, lined up horribly, had a leg length difference. There was, couldn't stand on one foot. It was quite shocking, but great athlete, 5 to 8% increase in power with orthotics and without orthotics. So his team it's the difference between being a domestique in that world, and he's now podium pretty regularly on the podium.
Nice.
Now, I'm only, putting some icing on the cake there to improve little things. But you still have the training behind it and the physiology behind it, which I have a lot less to do with things than I would like to think. But it's nice. For all of us. But it's nice when you can put some icing on the cake for someone who's, that one athlete I'm talking about had IT band problems for years and years and years, was rolling for about an hour and a half every day. Wow. Trying to loosen up tissue, and it's like, that's just not normal. That's not right. If you're having to do that just to function, there's way more going on here than nobody should need to do that.
Well, it would be nice at some point, and you might know more than me, is somebody close to having a smart insole that tells you and gives you feedback, like in terms of, like if I could slide something into my shoe and it tells me ground contact time, it tells me where I'm putting emphasis on the foot. Have you heard anything?
Well, to be honest, it's not used that way often, but I'm actually pretty sure that F-scan system that we talked about, which not the in-shoe system, not the Dr. Scholl's standing version of it, but that system's always used for pressure analysis.
Yeah.
My understanding that in the research world, it actually does have, you can look at contact times on it.
Yeah.
There are places in town where they do have in-ground sort of sensors where you can get contact time, but
nothing in the shoe yet?
In the shoe, there's one or two systems, but they're not...
Pretty crude.
They're pretty crude. I mean, you're 100th of a sec, you're getting some really tiny contact times. So it's not... I believe they're available in the research setting. They're certainly not being used in industry as a regular thing. The closest that I've seen kind of working that out, which I haven't played around with, is what's his name he's a track coach out of France. PJ?
Yeah.
He's using a Jump app in order to take video and then get contact times off of
there's a product, and I got to follow up with these guys, but I think it was called Firefly, and you clip it on the back of your shoe, and it has like accelerometers and things in there, and gyroscopes in it.
That's right, I did see that.
Figure out either the orientation of the foot during swing and contact phases, and also ground contact times. But I don't know how reliable it is.
That was sort of came out with a big flourish, and I've had nothing. I've heard nothing since. I know people who tried it initially. It was more said it seemed to be a little more in a beta stage, that it was early to market and then make tweaks after that, but I haven't. I'll have to look into that. See what's
because I'm having a good time with my fatigue science band here and looking at how my sleep was when I woke up, how many times, and it would be nice if again, I am not an athlete by any means anymore, but for my kids, you stick an insole in and it gives you feedback on what they did in that game or what they did on that run. That would be cool.
It would be,
But I digress.
Yeah.
So thanks for coming out
and
doing this. And I'll direct people to your site and your store. And if you're in Kelowna, by all means, like stop in, see Sean
Absolutely,
and Lee's, and see their setup. And if you go do a couple of wine tours, if you need some orthotics to keep you from falling over, you're the man to see.
Yeah, there's wine tasting half a block down from our clinic, so
you can do
definitely
gait analysis after every glass.
Yes, that would be an interesting study, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah. And they have a pretty good strength and conditioning conference up in Kelowna every July, I think.
They do,
so,
yeah, definitely.
Chris
Collins does that.
Yeah.
Actually, that's coming up pretty quick.
It is. So maybe
next week or two, I believe. Yeah.
Maybe I'll get this out before then. Maybe some people can stop by and see you.
Sounds great. Yep.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you very much, John.
Yeah. Thanks, Sean. See you, man.
Take care.
Yeah. Bye.
After that discussion, I'm sure you're going to want out and buy a new pair of shoes, get fitted for some orthotics, take pictures of your feet with your iPhone and send them to China, whatever, knock yourself out. But it did make me think a little more about what I wear on my feet, how it feels, how it feels over time, and how quickly I might, get new shoes or, I just think it's an interesting area. Maybe it's overthought. Maybe we should make it more simple for people. But it's out there, and there's a lot of people selling orthotics. And if you get a chance to interact with Sean, you can, hit him up on Facebook, and we'll put all his information up. He's based out of Kelowna, BC, which is a pretty beautiful place to visit. So if you're ever up there, drop in and see his clinic and store. But also hit him up with some questions, and whether it's through our site or our social media or connect with him. If you have any questions, a very good resource to have, even just about basic shoe purchases. He has some good insight into what's happened over the last 20, 30 years in running shoes and different types of shoes and what may work best for you. But hit us up on Strength Power Speed on Twitter, on Facebook, but also on our YouTube channel, Strength Power Speed with no vowels, and give us any feedback you can, and we'll do a follow-up with Sean and find out what's new with the technology coming out for orthotics and shoes. So thank you very much for strengthpowerspeed.com.